Right now, you have access to water that has been treated, filtered, and tested to a standard that virtually eliminates the risk of waterborne disease. For most of human history, none of that existed. The water our ancestors drank came from rivers, streams, and waterholes that were shared with every other animal in the landscape, that were downstream of carcasses, latrines, and flood debris, that were, by modern standards, comprehensively unsafe. And yet they survived, not just survived, thrived, reproduced, built the lineages that eventually produced you. The conventional explanation is that they had stronger immune systems, or that they simply accepted a high rate of waterborne disease as normal mortality. Both of these explanations are partly true, but they miss something important. Ancient humans were not passive recipients of whatever water was available. They developed specific strategies, specific knowledge, and specific practices for improving the safety of their water supply. Strategies that, when analyzed chemically, contain genuine wisdom about water treatment. None of it was accidental. Let us start with what is true about the conventional explanation, before examining what it misses. Ancient humans did have different disease exposure histories than modern humans. Populations that had lived in specific environments for generations would have had some degree of immunity to the specific pathogens in those environments, developed through centuries of exposure and natural selection. Individuals without that immunity died at higher rates in infancy and childhood, producing adult populations with higher average resistance to locally prevalent pathogens. This is real, but it does not mean ancient humans had immunity to all waterborne disease. Cholera, typhoid, dysentery, and giardia were real threats in any population, and evidence of waterborne disease appears throughout the archaeological record in populations that had no more immunity to it than modern humans do. What the conventional explanation misses is the active component of ancient water management. The knowledge, practices, and technologies that ancient humans developed to reduce waterborne disease risk without understanding the germ theory of disease. The key insight is that you do not need to understand bacteria to notice that water from certain sources makes people sick and water from other sources does not. You do not need germ theory to observe that water heated to boiling kills whatever makes it dangerous. You do not need chemistry to discover that certain containers, certain treatment methods, certain source selection criteria produce consistently safer outcomes. Empirical knowledge of water safety, accumulated over generations of observation, encoded in cultural practice, and transmitted as traditional knowledge, predates the scientific understanding of why it works by thousands of years. The history of human water management is not the history of people drinking unsafe water and dying. It is the history of people developing sophisticated empirical knowledge about water safety and encoding it in practices that worked, often without any understanding of the mechanism. The archaeological evidence for ancient water management is older and more sophisticated than most people realize. Wells, the oldest known water wells, date to approximately 8,000 years ago in Cyprus and Germany. These are not simple holes, they are engineered structures, lined with timber or stone to prevent collapse and contamination, dug to reach groundwater that is naturally filtered through soil. Groundwater from wells is significantly safer than surface water from rivers and streams because soil filtration removes many biological contaminants. The decision to dig a well to invest significant labor in accessing groundwater rather than using surface water reflects an empirical understanding that groundwater is safer, even without any knowledge of why. Boiling, the practice of boiling water before drinking, is documented in ancient medical texts from China, India, and Greece, all independently. The Sushruta Samhita, an ancient Indian medical text dated to approximately 600 BC, explicitly recommends boiling water and filtering it through cloth or charcoal. The Mahabharata contains references to water purification by sunlight and copper. Ancient Greek and Roman engineers built elaborate aqueduct systems to transport water from known safe sources over long distances rather than relying on local surface water. The common thread is observation without mechanism. Boiling kills pathogens. Ancient people did not know this. They knew that drinking water heated to boiling produced better health outcomes than drinking the same water unheated. That empirical observation was sufficient to drive cultural transmission of the practice. Vessel choice. Copper and silver vessels have been used for water storage in multiple ancient cultures, particularly in South Asia and the Middle East. Modern analysis confirms that copper and silver have genuine antimicrobial properties, Copper ions at the concentrations present in a copper vessel kill most common waterborne bacterial pathogens within hours. The ancient practice of storing water in copper vessels was not symbolic. It was effective antimicrobial treatment, discovered empirically, transmitted culturally, and maintained for thousands of years before anyone understood the mechanism. Here is the water treatment strategy that is least obvious from a modern perspective, but that may have been the most significant for much of human prehistory. Fermentation. Beer, wine, fermented milk, and other fermented beverages are acidic and contain alcohol and other antimicrobial compounds. They are, in practical terms, safer to drink than the water from which they were made. The oldest known beer production dates to approximately 13,000 years ago in the Levant, predating agriculture. The oldest confirmed wine production dates to approximately 8,000 years ago in Georgia. Fermented beverages appear independently in virtually every culture with access to fermentable materials. The conventional explanation for fermented beverage production focuses on taste, social ritual, and the psychoactive effects of alcohol. These are real factors. But researchers studying the history of fermentation have increasingly recognized the water safety dimension as potentially primary. In environments where available surface water was reliably contaminated, fermented beverages made from that water were significantly safer to consume. The fermentation process reduces or eliminates most common waterborne pathogens. The resulting beverage, consumed regularly, provided hydration without the disease risk of the source water. Ancient Egyptians provided their pyramid construction workers with a daily ration of beer. Roman soldiers received a daily wine ration. Medieval European workers consumed beer at volumes that would alarm modern nutritionists. These practices were not simply about pleasure or social bonding. They were about providing safe hydration in environments where the alternative, water from local sources, carried significant disease risk. Historian Alan Herrera has argued that fermented beverages were not an alternative to water but, in many historical environments, were the primary safe hydration source for large portions of the population. The modern assumption that alcohol consumption was recreational in these contexts may fundamentally misread what it meant to drink beer in ancient Egypt or medieval Europe. The beer was not instead of water, the beer was safe water, and the technology for making it had been developed and refined over tens of thousands of years before anyone understood why it was safer. The full picture of how ancient humans managed water safety reveals a consistent pattern that appears throughout this series in different forms. Human populations facing environmental challenges develop sophisticated empirical knowledge of those challenges over generations of observation. That knowledge is encoded in cultural practice, in specific behaviors, specific technologies, specific prohibitions, and transmitted across generations. The knowledge works because it is derived from observation of outcomes, even when the mechanism is not understood. Source selection is the clearest example. Hunter-gatherer populations show consistent preferences for specific water sources that, when analyzed, reflect genuine water quality differences. Spring water, upstream sources. Fast-moving water over still water, water from elevated sources over valley floor water. These preferences are not random, they reflect accumulated knowledge that certain source characteristics correlate with better health outcomes. The preference for running water over still water is particularly interesting. Still water harbors more pathogens than running water. This is a basic microbiological fact that modern science confirms. Ancient humans had no microbiological framework, but they had generations of observation showing that people who drank from stagnant sources got sicker than people who drank from running sources. The cultural encoding of this preference, the norm of drinking from moving water when possible, transmitted accurate water safety knowledge without any theoretical understanding of why it was accurate. The same pattern appears in the specific plant materials used in traditional water treatment. Many traditional cultures used specific plants to clarify and treat water, plants from the moringa family, certain bark preparations, specific charcoals from particular tree species. Modern analysis consistently finds that these traditional treatments have genuine water purification effects. The plants were not chosen randomly. They were chosen because generations of observation established that they produced better outcomes. And here is the implication for understanding ancient human intelligence that this series has been building toward from the beginning. Ancient humans were not waiting for modern science to solve their problems. They were solving them. With the tools available to them, observation, empirical testing, cultural transmission, the accumulated knowledge of generations, they developed effective responses to environmental challenges that modern science later explained but did not originate. They survived because they paid attention and remembered what worked. The claim that fermented beverages served primarily as safe water alternatives is contested. Alcohol consumption at the levels documented in ancient populations carries its own significant health costs. The public health trade-off was not straightforwardly positive. The copper vessel antimicrobial research is solid, but the effectiveness depends on the pathogen, the copper concentration, and the contact time. It is not a universal water treatment solution. Ancient water management was not uniformly effective. Waterborne disease epidemics in historical populations are well documented. The strategies I have described reduced risk, they did not eliminate it. The claim that traditional water source preferences reflect accurate empirical knowledge is generally supported, but specific communities held specific preferences that do not align with modern water quality science. Not all traditional water knowledge is accurate. What is established? Multiple ancient cultures independently developed water treatment practices that modern analysis confirms have genuine antimicrobial effects. Fermented beverage production predates agriculture in the archaeological record, and traditional water source preferences often reflect empirically derived safety knowledge. So how did ancient humans survive without clean water? By making it cleaner, not through chemistry or engineering in the modern sense, but through the application of accumulated empirical knowledge to a problem that required a solution. They dug wells to access filtered groundwater. They boiled water when they had fire. They stored it in copper vessels and observed that stored water sickened fewer people. They fermented it into beverages that were safer than the source. They selected sources based on generations of observation about which sources produced healthy and which produced sick. None of them understood why these practices worked. All of them understood that they did. The water coming out of your tap tonight has been treated to a standard ancient humans could not have imagined. And the knowledge that produced that treatment was built on the foundation of thousands of years of empirical observation by people who had no scientific vocabulary for what they were learning. They figured it out imperfectly, expensively, with significant casualties. But they figured it out. One question. Did you know that the ancient practice of storing water in copper vessels is confirmed by modern microbiology to kill most waterborne bacteria within hours? That this is why copper water vessels are still used in parts of South Asia today? Drop yes or no in the comments. If this changed how you think about what ancient knowledge actually was, hit like. And if you want to keep following these origin stories, subscribe. Next time, why did ancient humans sleep in piles? Group sleeping arrangements in prehistoric populations and what they reveal about the social architecture of prehistoric nights. See you soon.